all accompanied by the sound of music. So there's a lot we could talk about, but I think the main takeaway that we want people to get across is that all of this was all for good reasons.
Yeah, we are the radios of the 18th century. So just as communications are there, nowadays, someone's linked in a radio can tell troops to move here or there. You don't have the 18th century, but you can hear this all the way across the battlefield, and I can tell you how to move different places, or cease fire, make ready, do all of that, different commands from this and the fight.
Right, so when you've got this body of soldiers on the battlefield, you have to have a way to give them instructions, and the most basic way is to shout commands. So you could say left face, right face, to the front, march, make ready, take aim, fire, wheel left, wheel right. You can say all these things, but the human voice has limitations. You can only shout so loud, and the human voice will wear out over time. So the drum actually predates the fife. It is a signaling device on the battlefield. So that's probably what's going to happen first, is people are going to come up with drum signals that signal all these different things. So you might have something that you would play to signal a left face, or maybe a right face. So do you guys think that you would be able to recognize the difference?
That'd be hard.
Yeah, so it's one tap and then a flam for left face, and then two taps and a flam for right face. So, if every time you heard left face, right face, it was accompanied by those patterns, they'd start to become second nature. And not only that, you've got let's say you're moving as a formation of men, and let's say you're a company and you're advancing on the enemy, and you've closed and you've been fighting, and then let's say some officer decides, okay, this battle is not going in our favor, we need to retreat. What happens if you don't hear that everyone else is retreating?
You're fighting alone.
Yeah, you're fighting alone. You're going to get surrounded, you're going to get cut off, you're going to take heavy losses. So that's another instance where you need a nice signal. So you might hear retreats, advances, things like that played on the drum. Now, the drum was a really important instrument like in the Middle Ages. That's kind of when that came about. So you imagine a battlefield with knights and men in armor and swords, and I want you to imagine what that battlefield might have sounded like. When you have a sword fight, you hear a lot of this swing, swing, clang, 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 all very high-pitched noises, very high frequency range. So with the drum, it has a low booming sound. So it's not going to be competing with all that ching, 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 ching. But then a new military development happens, the battlefield changes. So by the 18th century, did you notice what weapon most of these men were carrying that you met today? Yeah, muskets, gunpowder. So once gunpowder becomes more common in the 1600s, you start to see the drum accompanied with a really shrill, high-pitched instrument. Because think about it, the drum makes this booming sound, and the musket also makes a booming sound. So if you have both of these together, both the really high pitch and the very low pitch, no matter what's going on, you can hear one or the other. So that's why drum and fife kind of work well together as signaling devices. Would you like to play a tune?
Yeah, which one?
Well, let's play the British Grenadiers. Are you folks familiar with the British Grenadiers?
Or Free America.
Or Free America if you prefer. So it's kind of fun. A lot of these tunes, how about this? We'll play a patriotic British tune for you called the British Grenadiers. You ready? So that was a patriotic British tune called the British Grenadiers, and it's basically detailing the exploits of a very famous unit in the British Army, the Grenadiers, how brave they are, all the wonderful things they've done. Now we're going to play a patriotic American song, a rebel song called Free America.
Ready?
You ready? So what did you notice?
Same thing.
It's the same thing. So oftentimes they would take popular songs and they would just change the lyrics. So that one's called Free America, and it's about,
all the kind of complaints. It lists all the complaints about taxation, about
yeah.
all these different things, and at the end, instead of a row to the British Grenadiers, it's
Huzzah,
huzzah, huzzah, huzzah to a free America.
So that's the main difference. A lot of them is the same, just different lyrics, but you can't really hear the lyrics here. So that's kind of funny to point out. What else should we play? Oh, are you guys familiar with the national anthem? Okay, you want to play the national anthem from this time period?
Let's do it.
1, 2, 3. So you guys recognize the American national anthem?
It wouldn't hail Columbia.
It's kind of interesting. So, of course, does anybody know when "Oh Jose can use the Star Spangled Banner"? Does anyone know when that was written?
War of 1812.
Right. So this is before that. So the tune we just played is Chester, which was written by William Billings, and it kind of serves sort of as the American national anthem during this time period. And it's all about triumphing over tyranny. And defying slavery, because they likened British rule to slavery, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. But it was a good propaganda, good thing to get people fired up. So that's kind of interesting to point out. A lot of people, when they think national anthem, they're going to think of the Star Spangled Banner.
There's also that song they wrote about derogatory to us. We love.
Oh yeah, you guys are probably familiar with this one. So it was at Lexington, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the British wanted to kind of deride the American rebel forces that were standing there at Lexington Green. So they had sort of this song that they used to make fun of the Americans. And you might recognize it. I'm sure you recognize that one. That's Yankee Doodle, of course. And if any of you know the lyrics, it's kind of fun to think about those lyrics and really break it down what they're saying in that song. So Yankee Doodle, of course, they're talking about this, colonial character, this American guy, Yankee Doodle, and he's gonna ride into town. But what's he riding on?
A pony.
A pony.
Because he can't afford a horse.
Because he can't afford a horse, so they're kind of mocking him. Right? Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony. Stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni, which in this time period, macaroni, that was kind of like a term for like the high fashion people in England and Europe. They would wear these fancy wigs and big fancy hats and clothing, very ostentatious, really fancy clothing. So this guy, Yankee Doodle, not only is he riding on a pony, but he simply sticks a feather in his hat and thinks he's high society and high fashion. So it's pretty interesting to think about how that song was originally an insult against these colonial forces that were rebelling against their government. But of course, the Americans are going to take that on and start to identify with that role. And then when they are starting to become more victorious in their campaigns, they're going to play it right back at them to say, look, you're being beaten by these laughable
farmers
characters.
who do whatever we want.
Kind of a counter taunt at that point. And also another thing to point out is, so we talked a little bit about music being used to play like patriotic songs, that sort of thing. We talked a little bit about how it can be used for commands to signal on the battlefield, but also in camp. It's really important. Did you guys see an alarm clock in that encampment over there? No. So we would be the alarm clock if we were field musicians in the 18th century. So there's a special tune that would play. Today in the modern day military, you might be familiar with the bugle call reveille. It's kind of like a... Right. Well, we can play the 18th century version of that. It's... Okay. You know that one?
Yep.
You want to try it?
Yep.
So if you were a soldier, that's going to be played, according to George Washington, this didn't always happen, but he really wanted it to be played once the sun has come up and there's 100 yards of visibility. That's officially when you're supposed to play the reveille. But the thing is, before you can play the reveille to wake everyone up, you got to get the drummers and musicians all together. So there's something called the drummer's call. That was played first. Usually in an encampment you'd have one drummer who's kind of assigned in the regiment to be the orderly drummer or the drummer of the police. And his job is basically to be on the parade ground next to your flag, the regiment's colors, basically all day. So anytime someone needs to send some sort of signal, they've got a go-to guy. So Sean, could you be our go-to guy? And he would probably start playing the musician's call or the drummer's call, and then you'd start to see all the drummers and fifers from all the different companies running to come assemble so that they can start playing the music to wake the troops up and start the work of the day. So you want to give that one a shot? So that
yards, 6 feet either side over your head or into the ground. So that's why we want all the lead going one way. And if we hit someone, that was just an added plus, because the idea was to advance within range where you fix your bayonets and push the other guys out of their position.
All right, so one final point I think I want to make. So we talked about music used to regulate camp life. You know, sort of as your alarm clock, your loudspeaker, your PA system. Also, we talked about music on the battlefield to help convey orders to large bodies of men under arms, but also to help regulate the march. So, you know, a lot of a war isn't just actual fighting. There's a lot of marching, getting from place to place. And it actually matters how fast or how slow and how long it takes to get places. So one thing about accompanying your march with music and having people march in step is there was actually a mathematical formula that was used back then to calculate the amount of time it would take to march certain distances. And that's possible because the rate at which people marched was regulated by the drill manuals and by the music. So there's two types of marches. There's the common march, which is 60 beats per minute or 60 steps per minute. So it's kind of hard to imagine, man, are we human metronomes? How are we going to know exactly what 60 steps per minute is? Well, if you've heard a popular song over and over and over again at that same tempo every time, it gets sort of ingrained. So when I'm not in the 18th century, I'm kind of a rocker. So is anyone familiar with the AC/DC's Back in Black? All right, so if you think of that hi-hat in the beginning, that is 60 beats per minute. And you don't have to be a human metronome to get at least close to that, just if you know that tune. So that's what the marching music did for the armies. So, you want to try a march?
Yeah. 21 day?
I'm gonna do Road to Boston.
Let's
march.
do it.
Let's march to Boston. 1, 2, 3, 4. You kind of get the idea. If you're just used to hearing that tune at that speed and you're always marching that speed, you can sort of estimate how long it's going to take you to get somewhere, right? Now, what if you do that estimation and you find out that you're not going to get there in time, you're not going to get there fast enough? Well, there's another march for that. That's called the Quick March, and it's 120 steps per minute. So that's roughly like a and there's tunes that accompany that, and you know, there's kind of an easy way to tell, even to someone who's not like trained in music, which ones are the common marches and which ones are the quick marches. And that's that the quick marches tend to be in another time signature, which is kind of a difficult concept to explain to non-musicians. But the easiest way to put it is when you're listening to the tune, can you say watermelon or can you say strawberry? So the one we just played was a common march, so it's one of your watermelon marches. So it's watermelon, 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 1E and a 2E and a 1E and a 2E. Right? So that would mean in 4 beats in a measure, you're dividing that up into 4s. So you got 1E and a 2E and a 1E and a 2E and a, so that do 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 do. So it's 1 and 2 and 1, a 2, oh, and 2 and so that's how it would be if you count it that way. Now your quick marches, they're strawberry songs. So they're like kind of your galloping, what we would call a jig in the 18th century. So let me see if I can play one for you. This is the French quick march. A lot of the Continental forces were kind of excited by the French alliance, and they were really impressed by the French music in particular. So it goes. So strawberry, 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 strawberry. 1, 2, 1, 2.
So we're obviously not going to wheel these people from line into column.
At that fast, yeah.
Yeah, because that would get chaotic. So the quick march is used a lot if you're marching from one place to another and you need to save time. It's a decision you have to make because they're probably going to be a bit more tired when they get there. So that's a tactical decision to make. So you might not want to march them all the way from here up to Boston to a quick march unless it's sort of an emergency.
But you might want to use that in that last 50 yards before you close them with bayonets.
Yeah, and also closing with bayonets, and closing to firing range. And there's actually a big problem in a lot of the Continental militias because, like I said, that strawberry rhythm, that strawberry, 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 that was actually a common dance form in the time called a jig. And a lot of the Continental musicians would play popular tunes for their quick marches, which you can imagine everyone marching quickly into battle with a bawdy tavern song in the background. So pretty quickly they made regulations that said, look, there are special military marches that we're going to use for this. We're not going to use Lully Bolero or something about, you know, puzzling someone's kerchie or anything like that. So kind of